to everyone. Yeah, which leads nicely onto the question. Why do this? I mean, partly it's because it's just quite nice to see people after 2 years of not seeing people. I mean, even if you have to sort of sit in a concrete bunker on the hottest day of the year to do it, it's still quite pleasant. So, and I'm really, astonished in some ways by the numbers of people who have turned up and stuck with it. And I think the reason that people have stuck with it is also something else, that they've grasped something. We've all grasped something that was made clear inadvertently by Andrew Bailey, who is Governor of the Bank of England, in a speech that he gave last September called The Hard Yards. And you can go and dig it out on the Bank of England website. And it's a kind of, one of these sort of overviews. I can't remember who he was speaking to, some sort of business dinner thing. One of these overviews of what's going on in the economy, and he has a whole section talking about inflation and what the Bank of England might do about inflation at the time. And there's just a single paragraph in it, which, due to my phone running out, I tried to plug it in, which makes reading it rather difficult. But let's chance the technology. Just in a single paragraph, he manages to say this. September last year, Governor of the Bank of England, describing the situation we're in terms of inflation, in terms of what the bank might or might not do about it. The shocks that we are seeing, he says, are restricting supply in the economy relative to the recovery of demand. This is important because monetary policy, in other words, putting the interest rates up, will not increase the supply of semiconductor chips, it will not increase the amount of wind, nor will it produce more HGV drivers. Moreover, tightening monetary policy, putting interest rates up, could make things worse in this situation by putting more downward pressure on a weakening recovery of the economy. Now, what's the Bank of England gone and done since September last year? Despite the governor himself having a very clear idea of what happens if you put interest rates up, which is, as he says, it weakens demand, it undermines the economy, and that even more than this, having a very clear idea that the kind of monetary shocks, in other words, price rises that we're seeing, are coming from things that have absolutely nothing to do with interest rates. They also have nothing to do with the other thing he goes on to talk about, taken up more recently by our dearly beloved Prime Minister, of wages and the amount we're paying people here. Boris Johnson talking sort of vaguely, as he does, about the wage price spiral, the idea that wages here are too high. So that leads to prices going up, that leads to people going out and demanding higher wages, leads to prices going up and so on, as he was saying last week. Now, this is on the most elementary level, plainly not true. Like, there is no way that cutting wages in this country, if you go out and say, right, nurses have to be paid less, which is basically what the government is saying. That's what the Treasury said last year, in real terms. Or teachers, or if you work in Tesco's or Sainsbury's or wherever it might be, like, there's no way that cutting or holding down the wages of those people changes the price you have to pay for gas you're buying from Qatar. That doesn't happen. There's no way that changing the interest rate, there's no interest rate you can find here in London that will end the war in Ukraine. That won't happen. You can't cut someone's wages far enough that they'll stop a plague of locusts, as is now happening in East Africa, or end floods in Brazil so that coffee can be grown properly. These things cannot happen, right? There is nothing you can do in the money system or by changing people's wages that will affect any of these. And yet every single person in a position of authority, whether it's the Governor of the Bank of England, whether it's other members of the Monetary Policy Committee, whether it's members of the government itself, will give you a story where what we have to do now, fundamentally, is either put up interest rates and or try and keep wages down. And neither of these things can work against the kind of inflation we're experiencing. So that tells you something important. It tells you something crucial, I think, about why this event matters. Because we have a situation where whatever ideas are in people's heads, whatever ways of working are built into the institutions we have, the idea of an independent, so-called, central bank that takes sole responsibility for inflation, that will manage inflation by fiddling around with interest rates and then kind of on the sly do a vast amount of quantitative easing. That's another story for the last decade. But basically, this institution is supposed to manage inflation, and it's got a big lever that can do nothing. But it still has to repeat a story that we're going to have to do this because this is just what we do. This is an institutional failing, and lurking behind that somewhere is a failing of ideas. That whatever ideas people have about how the world works inherited really from a crisis in the 1970s. I mean, that's where this stuff comes from, a wage price spiral. I mean, how much nonsense? What planet do you have to be on to sit there thinking that after a decade in which wages of most people in this country either stayed exactly the same in real terms or fell, and then you hit a period of exceptionally high inflation where, by the way, trade union membership in the private sector is what, 12% now? In 1979, it was more than half of employees. And you're busy saying, oh dear, there might be people going mad, going out there, bargaining for higher wages. How? How will they go out and bargain for higher wages if no one's in a trade union? With what? You're just going to turn around and say to your boss, oh, just pay me more. I mean, for a brief period, by the way, last year, people were doing the great resignation thing. You're just saying, I'm going to leave my job and get another one. That worked for a bit. It's not going to work against 10% inflation. It's not going to work if you don't have any institutions in your workplace that will go out and bargain higher pay for you. You can't get that bit of the wage price spiral where wages go up because there's no mechanism to make wages go up. And then incidentally, the government's sitting there saying, well, public sector pay can't go up, benefits can't go up, pensions can't go up. That's no part of the wage price spiral there. So that bit doesn't work. And then if you're saying wages are too high, plainly wages are too low and falling. Almost every part of this crisis is the exact opposite of whatever the official institutions and the official kind of rhetoric around it is telling you. It is not the case that wages are too high, and that's the problem here. Everybody should know this. If you just go out and try and buy some things, if you know people who try and buy things, if you know anybody who works, anybody who has to rely on money, which is everybody, you know perfectly well the problem isn't that you're being paid too much, is that you're being paid not enough. The problem isn't, as Milton Friedman once said, oh, there's too much money around. The problem is not enough money around, or rather, not enough money in the hands that people actually need it. Because its prices are going up and wages aren't. It's the opposite of the official rhetoric, the official ideology. And that's why conferences are think like this. That's why I thought this would be a good idea. Because when you have a crisis like this, that is exactly that ecological crisis that's driving all that price increase, that you have an institutional crisis where something like the Bank of England can't affect the rate of inflation. They can put up interest rates or whatever, they'll panic at the end of the year and probably pull them back down again. But it can't affect the rate of inflation that you're now experiencing. And if you have an official ideology that says, but it's going to be a wage price spiral, you can't pay people more, that is a major crisis on every level of the system, and it is a crisis of ideas. And what matters about a conference like this is an opportunity to start to shape and win and think about what ideas we might have to replace this. I'm so glad that all of you have come today. That was the purpose, I think, of what we're trying to do here. We have an opportunity to lay out an alternative to this. Just as there was an opportunity in the 1970s, seized in the end by Margaret Thatcher, by the Conservatives, by the neoliberals, we today have that opportunity, and this conference can be the start of that.